Once related, always related. What quantum entanglement is actually saying. All real living is meeting. That's from Martin Buber, I Now. 1. The experiment that disturbed Einstein. In the 1930s, Albert Einstein, Boris Podolsky, and Nathan Rosen published a thought experiment intended to demonstrate that quantum mechanics, however successful at prediction, could not be a complete description of physical reality. Their argument, known by their initials as the EPR paradox, went like this. If two particles interact and are then separated by any distance, quantum mechanics predicts that measuring one particle instantly affects the state of the other, regardless of how far apart they are. Einstein found this intolerable. He called it spooky action at a distance, and insisted that no physical influence could travel faster than light. Therefore, he concluded quantum mechanics must be missing something, some hidden local variable that determined the particles' states all along. Decades later, the physicist John Bell devised a mathematical test that could distinguish between these possibilities. Either the particles' correlations were predetermined by hidden variables, or they were genuinely non-local, genuinely connected across space in a way that had no classical explanation. Experiments beginning in the 1970s, becoming definitive in the 1980s and beyond, showed repeatedly and without any ambiguity that Einstein was wrong. The correlations are real. They are not the result of hidden pre-programming. Two particles that have genuinely interacted remain correlated across any distance, instantaneously, in ways that cannot be explained by any traveling signal between them. This is what physicists call quantum entanglement, and it has been described almost universally as one of the strangest and most counterintuitive features of reality, a mystery that defies classical common sense, a violation of our ordinary assumptions about how separated things behave. This essay proposes that the strangeness is not in the physics. The strangeness is in the assumption that separation is what we think it is. 2. What separation actually means. The classical assumption underlying Einstein's discomfort is this. Once two things are spatially separated, they are ontologically separate. They are distinct entities, and any influence between them must travel across the space that divides them. Space, in this assumption, is the final arbiter of what counts as separate. Entanglement violates this assumption. But notice what that violation is actually saying. It is not saying that a signal travels faster than light. The experiments confirm that no usable information is transmitted instantaneously between the particles. You cannot use entanglement to send a message. What it is saying is something more fundamental, that two particles which have genuinely interacted do not, after that interaction, become fully separate things. They remain a single system whose spatial expression is distributed. The encounter constituted them as a pair. The spatial separation that followed did not dissolve that constitution. They are not two things that happen to be correlated. They are one two-level event whose consequences extend across space. This is not mystical, it is structural. The pairing at the can level, the genuine encounter between the particles, is not a temporary condition that the spatial separation erases. It is a permanent fact about what occurred. The does level consequence, the specific irreversible record of the encounter, persists regardless of where the particles subsequently travel. The encounter is irreversible. Its wholeness is irreversible. Spatial distance is a does-level fact. The can-level event that preceded it is not undone by any does-level development. Einstein's discomfort arose from assuming that the spatial dimension of reality is primary, that if two things are far apart, they are truly separate. Entanglement is physics discovering through experiment rather than philosophy that this assumption is wrong. Spatial separation is real, but it is not the deepest description of what is or is not connected. 3. Where this appears in biology. It would be tempting at this point to claim that quantum entanglement explains biological and psychological phenomena of connection, that it accounts for the bond between mother and child, the coherence of ecosystems, the sense of shared awareness in genuine human encounter. This claim is made frequently in popular science and spirituality literature. It is not warranted, and this essay does not make it. The reason is specific. Quantum entanglement is a physical mechanism that does not survive the thermal conditions of biological systems at any scale currently measurable. The quantum coherence required for entanglement is extraordinarily fragile and collapses rapidly in the warm, wet, chemically complex environment of living organisms. The claim that quantum entanglement is the physical mechanism behind human relational phenomena goes beyond what can be shown. What can be shown is something different and, in its own way, equally striking. The structural pattern that entanglement demonstrates at the quantum scale, that genuine encounter constitutes a wholeness that subsequent separation does not dissolve, appears independently and observably at biological scales through entirely classical mechanisms. Consider the ecosystem. An organism does not exist independently of the relationships that constitute it. The mycorrhizal network connecting the roots systems of trees in a forest, the so-called wood wide web, documented extensively in the work of forest ecologist Suzanne Simard, means that individual trees are not, in any biologically accurate sense, separate entities. They share nutrients, chemical signals, and carbon across the network. Older trees actively support younger ones. A tree under pest attack sends chemical signals through the network that cause neighboring trees to upregulate their own defenses. The forest is the unit. The individual tree is the forest's local expression. Separate a species from its ecological relationships, remove the predator, eliminate the pollinator, sever the mycorrhizal connection, and you do not have a simpler ecosystem with one fewer component. You have a different ecosystem, often a damaged or collapsing one. The relationships are constitutive, not additive. The organisms are what they are because of and through their genuine encounters with other organisms. This is not quantum entanglement. It is the same structural principle. Genuine encounter constituting wholeness, operating through classical biological mechanisms at a completely different scale. 4. Where this appears in human relationships. Martin Buber's distinction between I, it, and I, thou relationships is the philosophical account of this same structural fact at the scale of human encounter. In an I-it relationship, the other person is encountered as an object, categorized, used, managed, kept at the distance of instrumental regard. In an I-thou relationship, genuine meeting occurs. The other is encountered in their full particularity, and both parties are changed by the encounter. The self that enters a genuine I-thou encounter is not the same self that exits it. The encounter constitutes both parties differently than they were before. This is not poetry. It is a structural observation about what genuine encounter does. A child raised in genuine relationship, seen, responded to, met in their actual experience rather than managed from a distance, develops differently, neurologically and psychologically, than a child raised in the absence of genuine meeting. The relational field is not an add-on to the developing human being. It is part of what the developing human being is. The encounters constitute the person. And those encounters, once genuine, leave permanent traces. The person who has been genuinely loved carries something in their nervous system, their relational capacity, their basic sense of what the world is, that persists long after the relationship ends or the person who loved them dies. The encounter was irreversible. Its constitutive effect does not dissolve with spatial or temporal separation. This is not quantum entanglement. It is the same principle operating through neurological and psychological mechanisms. Genuine encounter creates a wholeness that separation does not erase. The inverse is equally observable. Trauma, the wound the project has named as the civilizational condition, is precisely the consequence of encounters that were not genuine, of the child meeting not a responsive other, but a defended, managing, categorizing other, of the developing human being constituted not by I-thou meeting, but by I-it management. The wound is a relational fact. It arose in relationship. It persists in the nervous system not because the relationship continues, but because the encounter was irreversible. Its constitutive effect, negative in this case, does not dissolve with the passage of time or the physical absence of the one who caused it. This is why healing, in the framework this project has been developing, is also relational. Not because the wound can be undone, it cannot. Irreversibility is the nature of does-level consequence. But because new, genuine encounters can constitute the person differently going forward, layering new relational reality onto the permanent record of what has been. The lower chamber of the hourglass does not empty, but it continues to fill. 5. The structural pattern stated plainly. Here's what can be said across all three scales, quantum, biological, and human, without overclaiming the mechanism. Genuine encounter creates a constitutive wholeness. This wholeness is not temporary. Spatial or temporal separation does not dissolve what genuine encounter has constituted. The parties to genuine encounter are not subsequently the same as they would have been had the encounter not occurred. The encounter is a permanent fact, irreversible, received, entered into the record of what has been. At the quantum scale, two particles that have genuinely interacted remain a correlated system across any distance. The spatial separation is real. The constitutive wholeness of their encounter is also real, and it persists. At the biological scale, organisms constituted by their ecological relationships cannot be separated from those relationships without becoming different organisms or ceasing to be viable organisms at all. The network is not a convenience. It is a constitutive fact. At the human scale, persons constituted by genuine encounter carry the consequence of those encounters permanently in their nervous system, their relational capacities, their basic orientation toward the world. The encounter shapes what a person is. That shaping persists. The mechanism differs at each scale. What does not differ is the structural principle. The can levels constitutive pairing produces a does level consequence that is irreversible. Once genuinely related, the wholeness of the relation is a permanent fact about what has occurred. This is not spooky. It is the most ordinary thing in the world. It is also, when seen clearly, one of the most important. 6. What Einstein's discomfort was actually about. Einstein was not wrong to be disturbed. He was wrong about what was disturbing. He assumed that locality, the principle that things are only directly influenced by their immediate surroundings, was a fundamental feature of reality. Entanglement violates locality in a specific technical sense. The correlations between entangled particles cannot be explained by any local hidden variable. Einstein found this intolerable because he assumed spatial separation was ontologically final. What the experiments showed is that this assumption was the error, not the physics. Reality is not fundamentally a collection of separate local things that subsequently enter into relationships. Reality is fundamentally relational, and the relationships are constitutive, not merely connective. The separateness of spatially separated things is real but not ultimate. The constitutive wholeness of genuine encounter is also real, and it persists at a level that spatial separation does not reach. This is what the is, can, does structure has been saying from the beginning. The is ground is prior to and not divided by any division that occurs within it. The can levels constitutive encounters are real and their consequences irreversible. The does levels specific, separated, spatially distributed consequences are real, but they do not exhaust what is true about the entities that produce them. Einstein's God did not play dice, but Einstein's God also did not arrange reality as a collection of separately existing local objects. The universe is more relational than that and more irreversible. Entanglement is one of the clearest demonstrations of both facts simultaneously. Genuine encounter is irreversible at every scale. The particle, the ecosystem, the person, all carry permanently what genuine meaning has constituted in them. This is not a poetic observation, it is a structural one, demonstrable from the quantum laboratory to the forest floor to the human nervous system. Once related, the wholeness of the relation is a permanent fact. Separation is real, but it is not the final word.